Now, Sri Lanka is set to vote in a second national election in as many months, with a deeply divided opposition struggling to recover from a crushing defeat at presidential polls. The snap parliamentary election was called by the new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, the South Asian island's first leftist leader, after he won polls on a promise to combat graft and recover the country's stolen assets. Now, Dissanayake party is widely tipped to sweep Thursday's parliamentary vote, with analysts saying the opposition is in disarray. Now, the president, an outsider of the family parties that have dominated Sri Lankan politics for decades, swept to power, promising change as the country emerges from a crushing financial crisis. Millions of voters put faith in his graft-fighting pledge and vows to bolster a fragile economic recovery. To speak more on the issue and to understand the Sri Lankan political dynamics, I am being joined by Rohan Samarjiva, who is the Sri Lankan policy analyst and the chairman of a think tank. Thank you so much, Rohan, for speaking to us this morning. You know, President wants a fresh mandate in the legislature to drive economic reforms in the debt-ridden island nation. How do you read into that?
Well, he had only 3 members in the previous parliament, which had 225 members. This is the Sri Lankan system. Parliamentary elections are separate from the election for the president, who has considerable powers. It's conducted on a proportional basis. So if the president gets the same percentage of votes that he got 2 months ago, he will have a minority government. But it's likely that because turnout will be quite low, the percentage could go up and he could get a working majority.
Right. Opposition leader, and the party is expected to be NPP's main challenger alongside the New Democratic Front, a breakaway group from the party of the Rajapaksa family and backed by former President Ranil Wickremesinghe. How do you see the opposition fighting against this?
Well, the old Sri Lanka's oldest political formation, which was the one that got power immediately after independence, is the United National Party, or the UNP. It has now fractured into 2 parts, and it's likely that one of the parts will be the main majority. It's likely that it will be the previous leader of opposition's party rather than the entity that is associated with the former president, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is, by the way, not contesting in any form in this election, though he has gone on the hustings to support the people who worked with him in the economic recovery. And there are a whole number of new parties that are trying to occupy the chaotic political space.
Sri Lanka, Sri Lankans were hit hard by the 2022 economic crisis, triggered by a severe shortfall of foreign currency that added to problems caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. What steps does Sri Lanka need to take to avoid that situation in the future?
That's relatively easy. We have to stay with the promises and the commitments that we made to as part of the IMF program. And interestingly, President Dissanayake, who talked a different kind of language during his campaign, is staying more or less fully with the IMF program, and in fact has gone ahead and signed a budget support agreement for US dollars 200 million with the World Bank that commits to the continuation of the reforms initiated by President Rajapaksa. So while he comes from the left and while he was quite critical of the IMF program, it is quite likely that he will stay with the IMF program. Now, there will be a real tension because he knows that in order to keep the economy solvent, he's got to keep with the tax changes and so on that were introduced and some of the economic reforms. but quite a lot of the people who will be coming into Parliament from his party may not agree with those, because this was a tough time with a lot of austerity measures. And I think there's a lot of demand from the middle classes, particularly, to end some of the austerity measures. So I think we could expect some internal tensions in the government that will be now formed.
Right. Rohan, but investors worry that Dissanayaka's desire to revisit the terms of the country's IMF bailout could delay future disbursement and make it more harder for Sri Lanka to hit a crucial primary surplus target of 2.3% of GDP in 2025.
Indeed. The IMF third review was supposed to take place in October. It has now been postponed to February of next year. There is an IMF team in town. Actually, I'll be meeting them on Friday. The IMF process is going on, though it's delayed. So there is some concern that without the 300 million that will come from the next tranche, it may be difficult to work out the budget and keep to the targets, because these various targets, every 6 months, there have to be targets that have to be met. So it's going to be challenging. It's going to be a challenging few months ahead of us.
Absolutely. Rohan, thank you so much for joining us this morning.